Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We're discussing national political news of the day, and this week we have some doozies to discuss. I'll get right into it. Um, we Biden pretty much bombed, right, Dave? I mean, I don't think there was.
Yes.
Yes, I don't think there's been a
Disastrous.
disastrous debate performance in the history of debates. He got onto the air and just within the first few seconds looked confused, couldn't get his thoughts out. And although he started to do a little bit better towards the end of the debate, even then, I couldn't hear him. I couldn't hear him talking. I mean, he just was in real bad shape. His team has blamed it on a cold, has blamed it on a lot of travel. The point is they should have been ready. He should have been ready. And maybe it's time that we face the fact that maybe he can't be. Maybe he is in cognitive decline, and it's not going to get any better. Those of us who have had relatives or elderly friends who have gone into dementia or other types of cognitive decline know that it doesn't get better. It only gets worse. And I mean, we can talk about the highlights or the lowlights of the debate, and it's not even that Trump did particularly well. He lied, I think, set a record for lies that they've been fact checking, but that's just not the story. The story is that this was Biden's chance to basically take a lead in the race. He had kind of pulled up even. We'll talk a little bit about the polls and where they've gone. So, some of the polls have finally, real important polls have finally come out, and they're not looking good for him. And then we'll discuss a little bit about whether or not he can even really stay in this race. And if so, maybe briefly on who might replace him and how. And I'll just really quickly say that under the rules, he's got the delegates. Unless he willingly steps aside, there's really no way they can force the issue. They've got to convince him. There is talks that there's going to be sort of an intervention among Democrats, and they've been holding off for the past week, seeing how it goes. He's set up for an interview with Stephanopoulos, but that's a softball interview. It most likely, I don't know, maybe Stephanopoulos will be tough enough to do everybody a favor and press them so that we know if he can perform under pressure. But his team are saying, well, he had a better day the next day in South Carolina. This was just a setback. This was not a setback. This was a disaster. I'm just going to say right now, if he stays in the race, I don't see how he wins. I don't believe that Biden voters are going to convert and vote for Trump. I just think that it's completely demoralizing the base, and there just won't be the turnout necessary to defeat Trump. Whereas MAGA is going to be energized; they'll be turning out. I can also tell you that from what I'm reading, that Trump and the Republicans are actually kind of terrified. This is kind of a careful what you ask for type situation, because they're terrified about what will happen if he gets replaced by Harris, Gavin Newsom, Whitmer, or possibly even Michelle Obama, who in a poll pulled 11 points ahead of Trump in the same poll that Biden and he were even, and the others were maybe behind Trump a little bit, mostly because of lack of name recognition, I would think. Harris is 1 point behind, which is statistically the same thing. There is so much to talk about here. Dave, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Cool. Thank you for that setup. Yeah, I think it's while watching, we had people at the house and we were, we were online chats and people were texting, and I think we're representative, at least, my peer group, are representative of the 50 million at least people that watched. That it was, I used the word with you, disastrous. People have used other words, but really, I think it's like the aftermath. Number one, you just have to point out that this was just the setting itself allowed for Trump to appear on his best behavior. despite the fact that he's accredited with, depending on who was doing the fact checking, between 30 and 50 misstatements. People call them lies. I just think he's Trump doing Trump, where he just riffs on the things that he likes to say to his supporters, regardless of their factual basis. Call it a lie. That's how he rolls. That's not a surprise, but he got
We
to,
did talk about how this format could actually benefit him, and it did.
yeah,
Maybe not without the audience. The audience might have made things worse for writing,
it
but
definitely
the
did.
not being able to interrupt.
Yeah, so
That
that's
helped
the
it.
thing, yeah, I think you and I, we can do this. We can go back and forth, and that we can add value this way. Besides not being able to have his worst instincts shine, I think that because for folks who didn't watch yet, in the first maybe 90 seconds to 2 minutes of Biden talking, um, he started off on a path that people have described as rigor mortis almost, like that he was just not articulate, not animated, couldn't, he was so exhausted, and body posture, engagement with the cameras, all those things were lacking to such an extent, and we could talk about that more. I don't mean to pile on the rabbit here, but those are the types of observations people are making. But my point here is that even Trump himself, I think, was well behaved, and I mean, dare I say, respectful.
Mhm.
Trump did not take advantage of the situation to sort of pick on the weakling, so to speak. He did lie. He did do his own thing, but he was not cruel. And I think that actually made him look as better than I would have
Yeah.
imagined under the circumstances. And I don't mean to make light of it, because
Yeah,
it's
no, he didn't make the comments you would have expected. He had really good instincts that way. He held back.
yeah.
Um, and um, and basically just let Biden hang himself.
And so yes, as you said, like as the debate went on, you know, after the damage was done in the first half, the second half there was a degree of recovery. Um, but I think that to a certain extent, I don't know if I said this out loud or not yet, but it's like a tale of two cities, where there are people in the Biden camp, in the Democratic National Party leadership camp, that we'll get into the details, but really just circled the wagons and have done everything that they can to mitigate the fallout. But the other side of the coin here, the other lane, is that people, the worst fears have been brought to light. And if anybody had raised the criticism in the past that the Democratic Party needs a young, energetic, and articulate spokesperson because of the risk to the future of America that Trump poses, that's the argument that they make. That now they're really gonna be entrenched, because the challenge is, um, people are really questioning if the president is prepared to serve for the next 4 years.
Right.
And I think sincerely people don't know how they feel about this issue. Uh, I'm sorry, they know how they feel, but they're taking time to really measure what does that mean? What's the implications? What do you do? And we could talk more about the details, like I said, but the Democratic Party is really going full circle the wagons, triage mode. But there are a lot of smart people out there and connected people out there who've continued to just say, don't disbelieve your lying eyes, Houston. We have a problem.
I agree. Now, I actually have a theory, and I'm going to wrap it up at the end of the show with my prediction. But I actually have a theory that this was part of the reason they had such an early debate. This is the first presidential debate ever where it was conducted before the two candidates were officially even nominated, right? And it's still a couple months before the Democratic convention. They have time, and I think that was kind of deliberate. I think there was a sense here that they were going to tell Biden, okay, this is your chance, do it. Otherwise, we got to come up with a plan B. And I think despite what they're saying publicly, I think they're talking about a plan B. And I'll talk about why I think that in a minute. Pelosi and Clymer, two of the spiritual leaders of the party at this point, basically gave permission They said it is a legitimate issue for either candidate to raise as to whether or not it's a condition, and that to me is giving permission to Democratic leaders who are in office to step up and say, you know what, we need you to step down. I think that there is behind the scenes pressure on them. And I think they wanted to have this time to really work that in. We're seeing that the polls aren't working out for them. We can talk about the Siena poll, the New York Times poll, it does lean conservative, but before the debate, Trump was 3 points ahead, a little bit of an outlier there. Most of the others had him even, but now it has them 6 points ahead. And regardless of whether a poll is accurate in terms of the polls are really good for tracking motion, and the polls are moving away from Biden at this point, as we can be expected. And what's happening is that the undecideds are increasing. They aren't necessarily going to Trump, except for the Siena poll has 49% supporting Trump. I question that. But the Democrats have to do this, and I'm going to say it flat out. If they do not convince Biden to step aside and replace him, they will not win. Trump will be the next president. Assuming other things happen. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this too: if Biden steps down, no matter how they do their process and no matter who the replacement is, that replacement will defeat Trump, probably handily. Even the people that we don't like, necessarily, even the people that are not necessarily the best candidates, that certain people don't like. I'm going to have a prediction about what I think is going to happen at the end of the show, but the donors are canceling fundraisers. Some of them are talking about just focusing on the down ticket, saying, all right, it looks like Trump's going to be president. We need to make sure he doesn't get both branches of Congress, and we need to win some governor's races. And the talk is getting louder every day. And apparently there's some sort of meeting between the mucky mucks. I'm talking to all kinds of people who don't want to give up on it. They like Biden. He's a nice guy. But, you talk about whether he can perform in the second term. I'm worried about whether he can survive a second term. I mean, what this job does to people, it is a high pressure job. It's terrifying. If anybody Googles it, go look at the before and after pictures of when people go into the presidency and when they come out. Obama was gray. Granted, he was in that age area where you tend to gray, but he was gray. Bush looked ragged compared to before he went in. It takes a lot out of you. And the difference between now and 4 years ago, part of it was the format, again, allowed Trump to keep arguing until finally Biden got in, will you shut up, man? And that probably won that again was his there you go again moment. I just don't see an alternative. The Democrats have to find a way to convince Biden to drop the campaign, and then maybe an open convention, or maybe they simply just move Harris up. I know a lot of people think that that's not a good idea, but no matter what, when you do make this replacement, then it's not Biden's age and that becomes the issue. It's another candidate's.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things worth mentioning, and one is the debate performance itself, the kind of the impact on people's just overall perception. So there's a pretty scary number that came out. Nate Silver published it, of 538 fame. Now he's with ABC. And they asked registered voters, does the candidate have the mental and cognitive health to serve as president? Mm-hmm. Biden's new numbers now are 27% of registered voters say he does, and 72% of registered voters say he doesn't. So, like I said, that's a feeling. That's because people don't know what his capacity is, but people are concerned. People are legitimately concerned. But what are we seeing? Like, so we can acknowledge that there's lots of polls. There's the results are pretty shocking and uh, they do not bode well for the president's reelection chances. Let's just say that. But what are we seeing in the face of that? We're seeing that the inner circle met this weekend and have come up with a survival plan that they published out in Axios. It's a 10-point plan. And they're really, to a certain extent, like I said, they're circling the wagons, and they're saying, these are Biden's delegates, and unless he gives them up and lets them go,
Right.
formally, it's not going to happen. So short of that, it'd have to be like a 25th Amendment type thing, which that's probably not going to happen either. So what the reality of it is that regardless of where people fall, and many people are saying he should drop out. Many prominent, respected insiders and friends are saying that. But the circling the wagon has begun, and that's already starting to tone down a little bit. We're not going to get into all 10 points of the plans, but the idea is that they're going to say it will be worse without him. We can do this. We're going to, have a interview on Friday, and we're gonna get out there with the speech of a lifetime at the convention. He's going to prove his vitality. We are going to engage the media that stays with us, and we're going to ignore the media that doesn't. They're just checking all the boxes. But his former chief of staff, and now the person who did the debate prep, his name is Ron Klain. He said 100% Biden is staying in, and big money donors do not get to dictate the nominee of the Democratic Party. So that's right now we're seeing this I want to call it a cooling off period after the fever pitch, and we'll see where the chips fall in the next few days.
The thing is he will lose. I'm sorry, the 10-point program, staying with it, blah, blah, blah. That's just, that's whistling in the dark. He will lose if he stays in the race. I'm hoping, and there is some indication that they're saying this publicly so that he doesn't get put on too much on the defensive, and privately they're saying, man, you got to drop out. Okay, do this Stephanopoulos interview, whatever, but do it. But then after that, you got to be ready to move out. It's just not. It's not going to happen. Trump will be the president if Biden stays in the race. End of story. And I know people are angry with me at saying that, but and if by some miracle he does survive, he does win the election, I don't think he will be alive in 4 years. I don't think.
Biden was already against the wall a little bit in the swing states. Of the 6 sort of core swing states, for people that don't remember, that were, there's a set of them in the South and Southwest, Southeast and Southwest, and then there's a set in the Northern Midwest. He was already behind, depending on the poll, depending on how you look at it, he was already behind a significant amount, particularly in the South. Yeah. And so he, like, the blue wall that he needs to hold on is Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And on the night of the debate, Gretchen Whitmer, she actually made an insider call that said, this Michigan's gone. We just need everybody to know Michigan's gone. And again, there's lots of polls. It's still a little bit early, but all these states have moved already, somewhere around 2% against him in places where he was already behind, between up to 5 and beyond percent. So it's really into the red zone in the states that matter most. So it's not just how this is seen in New York and LA or in blue states, solid blue states. It's really on the margins where this type of crisis is having a measurable and dangerous impact.
Their decision to attack Ahmaud Arbery in their driveways because he was a black man running down the street.
Could have a gun, and he definitely has fists.
I shot him.
Why?
He had my gun. This is a life or death situation.
So proud of the jury and the jury system because it gave Kyle Rittenhouse a chance that all these other talking heads on television didn't give him. They had him convicted a long time ago.
This guy was a violent criminal, and the U.S. Marshals killed him. And I will tell you something, that's the way it has to be. There has to be retribution when you have crime like this.
So a lot of other stuff has been happening, and of course, the Supreme Court came down with a couple of really key decisions on Monday, and one of them is that Trump is entitled to immunity for all official acts. That is, any act that he did in his capacity as president. If he exercised the presidential power, or if he did it in an official capacity. That is part of it. The other part is that it gets remanded for the prosecutor and then later the lower court to determine, okay, which of these acts was in official capacity and which weren't. And it's really nebulous as to what constitutes an official act. I will say, for instance, the attempt to install Jeff Clark in Department of Justice. That's something the president can do, right? He can put him in there temporarily pending that. The analogy that has been raised, I believe by Jackson in her dissent, is that what this means is that if a president was to go kill somebody with his own shotgun, he could be prosecuted, but not if he orders the Navy SEALs to go do it for him. And even if it's an assassination, there is no. And Roberts, Justice Roberts, in his decision, made a remarkable comment about this, saying it's not that the president is above the law; it's that his actions are the law. I mean, that's right out of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. It's bizarre. And it contradicts what he said, by the way, in his confirmation hearings, in which he said no president is above the law. And the idea that you can have it said that way, it essentially makes him king. There's no precedence for this in our own history. It makes him king. I mean, Jackson, his favorite president, made some pretenses towards that, but the Supreme Court never ruled this at all. And so there is this danger. Of course, if it's not official, he can be prosecuted for it. But then there's also a corollary. Not only, even if there is actions that he did that are prosecutable, you cannot use any communications between him and his cabinet or trusted advisors as evidence towards a conspiracy or towards these other charges. So, for instance, of course, conversations with John Eastman are probably fine because he wasn't officially in the cabinet, right? But with anything you had with Barr or anything like that, you can't. Those are not to be put in front of a jury. That's remarkable. For some reason, the conservatives on the Supreme Court no longer believe in judicial restraint because that wasn't even an issue that was raised. He's like laying out a whole doctrine that wasn't even raised in the question. There's so much to talk about with this decision. I just want to say, though, that you had a jury of 12 people say that, Mr. President, you are not above the law. And now you have 6 people in the Supreme Court saying, well, no, he's not above the law. He is the law. I mean, this is absolute craziness. And I'm not even worried about it just for Trump. Let's say Trump is on his best behavior for 4 years. Some president somewhere, this is completely puts conservative Burkean political philosophy on its head. It is premised on, because the only restraint, by the way, at this point would be impeachment, which we all know is a joke of a political process, or not getting reelected, which doesn't mean anything in your second term. And other than that, there is no disincentive, let alone deterrence to a president using the office to do that. So we are now dependent on the virtue, the personal virtue of the person with that power. That is totally against Burkean philosophy. The whole idea of conservative politics and the checks and balances is that we are fallen, a fallen race of beings, and we are imperfect, and therefore any power needs to be checked. But there's no check on this power, zero, none. And that is a real scary thing. And that is the product of a medieval perception. It's Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, which was basically a refined version of the whole idea of the sovereign as king, as absolute ruler.
Yeah, just to pick up on where you left off there, even Alexander Hamilton addressed this issue in
Yeah.
the Federalist Papers, where he was just trying to make the case for people that said, "Wait, do we have an elected king? Like, we don't want to go out of the frying pan into the fire here." And he tried to mitigate those concerns about how actually with the checks and balances, the president is not above the law. Like he's constrained by the Constitution, or I say the president. They are constrained by the Constitution. But what did the Supreme Court do instead? Was to put in place, like you said, it's not in the Constitution that this tiered level of immunity that has at its highest most protected status the absolute immunity from any prosecution for any official acts that are within their constitutional authority. And that's a lot. There's a lot of things that the president does as president. We could talk about what I think is the more challenging aspect of this, is that there are, the presumption of entitlement to immunity for all official acts. So there's the core acts, and then there's all the other acts. And they're saying, well, you can review, like the courts are here to review if there's anything that the president ought to be held accountable for. And sort of by definition, that means while they're president. Because you could argue that most of the things that they do while they're president, they could say, they get shuffled around from one event to the next, and it's always as president. All the meetings, all the speeches, all the decisions, that's as president. But then only this third tier, which is personal acts, that there is accountability, there's criminal accountability for personal acts. That's still a thing. Like you said, this was made up out of whole cloth. But the question is, how much of this is how will this impact not just Donald Trump but the future? And this implies that in every potential case going forward, that you would, that the case will have to be made. Is this a reviewable act? Is this an accountable? Is this something? Yeah. Is this something? Can you make the case that the person was not really acting as the president? Well, let's apply it to Trump now, and I'll throw it back to you in a second. But Roberts himself in the decision did say that, like, well, when it comes to conversations between the president and the Department of Justice, absolute immunity, basically no matter what.
Right.
And that's a leap of faith that, well, you might have special privileges. You might have special privileges about the conversation, but not for criminal conversations. And then similarly, the conversations with Vice President Pence, they said, Roberts in the decision, the court found, well, anything that he said to the vice president, it was about the official duties. Well, yeah, there was official duties to criminally block the outcome of the proceedings. So they basically have. You and I have talked about this before with other issues. This court is a radical court. They have proven themselves to be not conservative, but to instead be agenda driven.
Yeah, real quickly, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about what charges can remain and what may not. It may be that, for instance, the then president's telephone call to the Secretary of State in Georgia to get him 13,000 votes. It may be that wasn't an official capacity because making that phone call is not something that is mandatory to the president's function. So that may survive. Whereas pressuring Pence to cancel the electoral college count would not be, because he's talking to his vice president, right? I mean, it's kind of iffy here. We do know also that the sentencing hearing that was set for July in the case that he was just convicted in has been postponed to September to explore the possibility as to whether or not this is going to be preempted. I'd be hard pressed to see how filing fraudulent tax documents and talking with Cohen, I don't see how that would be in it, but I think the judge has to hear the arguments and to do that. Also, probably it wouldn't apply to the classified documents case that's currently being destroyed down in Florida, because that happened after he was president, unless they can get Supreme Court to rule that you're president always, and so anything you do after that, after you're president, is official. I mean, and I don't know how ridiculous they can get. I mean, this is just absolute out of the Middle Ages concept of a sovereign and government, and nobody else has this kind of power. Nobody. I mean, you don't give it to them, so they're going to review whether or not it's official. This is over the top, possibly one of the worst decisions, and it may be what ends democracy here. If not with Trump, I'll give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Trump isn't that bad, let's say. I mean, and I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but and that he won't take advantage of this. Somebody will. Somebody will at some point in time. It is inevitable because I don't like to use the term human nature, but people do this. People take advantage of their position to commit crimes. It happens. I don't know where else to take it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say I spoke a little bit about the pressuring Vice President Pence. So that didn't fall. I misspoke. That didn't fall under absolute immunity. That's the presumptive immunity piece of it. So that's an example of how any prosecutor for any of these cases and any future cases for other people, they'll have to make the case. So, for example, the Jack Smith DC case that's been sent back to the judge, and so now actually Jack Smith has signaled he's going to review all the filings and submissions to make to comport them into compliance. And there's pauses in all the other cases about how, hey, Trump's lawyers are making the case. This is a complete exoneration. Trump himself said completely. I was completely exonerated. So that he's paying lawyers to go out and make the case that this allows him to make the claim that, hey, none of these charges should be sticking. Now, granted, there's a couple of New York cases that have already happened. Those civil cases are still under appeal. I don't think it's going to have any impact on them. Yeah, the Florida documents case and there's the Georgia case. Chances are that those lawyers will have to make the arguments stand, and this will go all. There'll be lots more appeals, so it's justice delayed, and ultimately that it is inaccurate for him to say he's exonerated, because there still will be reviews of the applicability to the new standard, and also ultimately there will be the pendulum will swing, I think, and even though this case makes claims about sort of the absolute nature of things, I think that it's not all doom and gloom. I think the reality is that there is a mechanism for review, and also some of these things, I mean, not to laugh but make light of it, but some of these things that are being adjudicated in state court were not while Trump was president. So, for example, that documents case, when you had agreed with me that it's not going to really have an impact because it's not a presidential duty to, when you're not in office anymore, fail to comply with requests to return classified documents. That's not a core presidential duty, and it's not even a presidential duty. It's a personal act. So there's going to be some hand-wringing about it, but I still think there's accountability. All accountability is not lost.
I think also another careful what you asked for, by putting the sentencing hearing off until September, it's not going to be old. A lot of the concerns that he was going to be sentenced in July, it would be appealed and then out of the news. It's going to be in the news right then and there, right as we're in the heat of the fall campaign, whoever he's running against, and it does, and it's not going to look good for him either way, because there are a lot of middle of the road voters who will say that wow, he got a Supreme Court to to make this crazy ruling, and everybody's telling me it's crazy. Maybe it's crazy. This ultimately may not help his campaign. It just may get him out of some serious criminal charges. Final topic. Supreme Court has overturned a precedent that was involved the Chevron case. It actually involved back in the 1980s. This is the 1984 case. It involved President Reagan's then deregulation scheme, and in it, when there were so many changes and so many ambiguities in that law that there were environmentalists and other people that were complaining about it, and in fact he prevailed on it, saying because the Supreme Court, which was a conservative court at that time, I don't know why anybody says any of the Supreme Court majorities have been liberal since basically the Burger Court. It has been at least a 5-4 majority conservative the whole time, and by this time Reagan had a Supreme Court to rule that basically we can have the individuals that are in these regulatory agencies with all the expertise interpret the law and its effect and its application, as long as the interpretation is reasonable, and the courts can only challenge their interpretation if their interpretation is unreasonable. This is kind of a tricky rule of law, and at the time it was done to defend deregulation. Ironically, this conservative decision, 4 decades later, was called into question because basically the plaintiffs in this case complained that these regulators are basically creating their own laws and are basically without any control from Congress or the president, basically making things difficult for business and so forth. And so what happened is that the Supreme Court ruled that no, it is up to judges to review any interpretation, any application of the law. Now let's take into account, when I was in law school, I took a class on environmental law. And at that point, the professor told me that environmental law, in terms of volume, takes up half the volume of all the federal laws. It's complicated stuff. It's stuff that was set up by testimonies in committee from experts, and a lot of it is general, and try not to micromanage, because the people that are in these agencies, in theory, have some expertise as to what they're actually dealing with, more so than the judges. And also they need to be able to have that flexibility to do it. If they have to run to court every single time, regulation is going to be very difficult. So I just want to give that little intro, and I can provide a few more details, but there was again a vehement opposition dissent to it. It may be that environmental laws are even more than half at this point, because they don't stop writing laws and they don't usually erase them. But this is but basically the court, Judge Neil Gorsuch did a concurring opinion today. The court places a tombstone on Chevron no one can miss. In doing so, the court returns judges to interpretive rules that have guided federal courts since the nation's founding. Well, the nation a couple of 100 years ago was a lot different than it is now. Actually, 2.5 centuries ago. All today's decision means that going forward is that federal courts will do exactly as the court has since 2016 and exactly as it did before the mid 1980s. Well, that basically it's going to handcuff regulation because anybody who doesn't want to be regulated is going to be able to bog this thing down in court, where judges who don't know anything about the subject matter are going to have to provide interpretations.
Yeah, thank you, big time. It's great to have a lawyer introduce this because I couldn't have done anywhere near as good a job. So thank you. This, I think that many times people are hyperbolic about courts court decisions, but we're seeing that sometimes that outrage is warranted, and this is one of those cases. This is one of the ones you and I've hinted at all year, that it could end the functioning of the executive branch as we know it. A lot of times when we think of the executive branch, we think of the president, the White House, their staff. But in reality, most of the executive branch are those who execute the laws that Congress puts out. Congress is typically very ambiguous, or even massively ambiguous, not just a little bit, but they'll pass laws that say these are the aspirations of law in America. But then the executive branch, the regulators, the administrators, they're actually the implementers and the teeth. Now, I could see how lots of folks have said, hey, these are unaccountable bureaucrats, and this Chevron decision allowed maybe too much deference to their judgment. But this is a baby with the bathwater moment in our history, so much so that in the dissent, Kagan, Sotomayor, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, they said this will cause a massive shock to the legal system. And the reason why is because anybody who disagrees with a regulation that affects their life or their business, their commerce, or even their priorities and values, they can now bring these cases to court. And granted, you had said, well, this has, it's always been the case, but now they're going to bog down the courts with any, across all the regulatory areas: environmental safety, food safety, health care, all sorts of things. And it's a known, like this, people knew this going into this. Number one, that this challenge was going to be disruptive, and number two, that there was an agenda behind it. So the courts will literally now be in the position of hearing from the Justice Department on behalf of these agencies who want to continue to keep these rules that guide everyday life and commerce in place. If we thought that having a dysfunctional Congress was okay, the stalemate between, if you don't have a supermajority in the Senate, you can't get anything through. This shows how unokay or not okay that really is, because now Congress has to have robust, articulate, comprehensive rules in place, or else there's going to, it'll be that much less likely that it gets followed. And so the costs to the government to implement these rules will go up immensely. I'll say one more thing and then I'll pass it to you, because I think this is the important part. Stare decisis, the principle that you're supposed to let the decision stand. I think that when I was saying before and in other shows that I think this court is radical, it's because they don't adhere to stare decisis. They find a reason. If you were not part of this court majority and you overturned this many precedents, people would call it radical. That's why I say it's radical, because in this instance, Roberts just declared, hey, this Chevron doctrine, it's just not workable. So because it's not workable, there's no reason, there's no justification to have it. It's just too difficult to say. These, putting words in his mouth, paraphrasing the decision. But basically, he's like, you don't know if a regulation is ambiguous, so therefore it should be adjudicated by the courts. Well, I don't think that that's the standard by which we undermine, 40 years of principled ways we structure how our government works.
I agree. Now, Congress could possibly turn this around. I mean, obviously the current breakdown wouldn't do it, because they could, in theory, enable the agencies to interpret. that. Will the judges then say, well, no, now Congress is stepping into our power here. We are the ones who interpret the law, and we can benefit from it. And Roberts tried to sort of mitigate the opposition by saying, it's not that the courts have to ignore the interpretation of the agency. It's just that they can consider it. It's just one among many considerations, and the other side can bring in its experts. And so then you're having scientific issues debated in a court setting, and that's just not really the best forum for it. It's usually within the agencies themselves. They're set up for this, to make these determinations. But one thing that will probably happen is by Roberts saying that a lot of the more, I'll just say, liberal judges will probably say, well, that's your interpretation. I'm going to base my decision on that interpretation then, and we'll uphold it. It just depends on what part of the country you're in as to whether or not, as to how effective the EPA is going to be and these other agencies. But people are predicting a return to Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, right? In terms of the ability to regulate anything, mad cow disease, all these things that where decisions had to be made at the administrative level. Congress could probably empower it a little bit more, but it's not going to right now, certainly. And stare decisis, it's dead. I mean, you talk to Justice Thomas or Alito, they don't even address it. They'll tell you stare decisis is not in the Constitution. I mean, that's, if you were to talk to them privately, that's what they would say. They don't care. It's if past Supreme Court justices majorities have made the wrong decision, so be it. We can overturn whenever we want. And Roberts is making a pretense at it, but it's really, they're not, they are radical, and they're also, I said in the last segment, they're not exercising judicial restraint. Right. You're supposed to avoid, if you can make a ruling that is not based on a constitutional question, you're supposed to avoid the constitutional question because you don't want to pollute constitutional law with too many decisions that may be inconsistent with each other. That was judicial restraint. Instead, in this one, they go to the constitutional question, this majority does, sometimes even when it's not even emphasized that much in the papers of the attorneys that are arguing the case, because they always assume they had to focus on a statutory question or a procedural question. And this court all the accusations of judges creating law. I mean, it started, well, it didn't start there, but it was, Bush v. Gore, where they created a safe harbor clause that wasn't in the law. They just said, well, they must have intended for it to be, or why would they set these deadlines up? It's like, that's not up to you to set one up for them. This is, but it was result oriented. And we have a whole series of decisions since then that are result oriented, even before Roberts took over and even before Alito was on the case. This is really bad news for jurisprudence in general. And to make matters worse, they are already making hints as to how they're going to rule in future cases they even heard. Thomas did that already, saying, gives us a chance to review that horrible decision about equality of marriage, right? I mean, he's already saying that. This is not, Burkean conservatism is dead. They might as well just throw Burke, not even bother with him. They make such claims. Stop saying, magazine, rename yourself Human Events. You don't have anything to do with that time period. But anyway, it's, it's amazing. And it's not a conservative majority anymore. It's radical.
Yeah, I think a couple last points here in our closing minutes. One is that so some folks may not realize this, but it's expensive to go to court, and very few people can use the courts in the way that the forces that are aligned behind this change of law really hope to use it. So I mentioned like the health and human services aspects of it, but you can just picture sort of any, I don't want to like name any one sector of the economy, but just picture, say, Wall Street, finance, banking, insurance. That's a really important part of our government. Antitrust, and technology, all sorts of future technologies that we talk about. Privacy rules that have to do with the FCC, and just go down the list. All the things that we say, hey, I have a right to that, or hey, there's a law that's going to give us protections, or they're all in jeopardy now. And so the question is, how much resources does the federal government have to commit to fighting really powerful and motivated special interests? Now, this is a leveling of the playing field to a certain extent. The government, some people view the government as the Leviathan, but also justice, as I said, justice is expensive. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. But the other thing too is the fairness piece of this. So Roberts did say that this isn't going to automatically overturn every case that was affected by this principle, but then the question is, it will affect everyone who petitions the courts for redress, and so that way impacted businesses with deep pockets they will bring these cases to bear,
Yes.
and then those that can't afford to won't. And I think that there's an equity issue here too.
There's so much more to say about this, but we are out of time for this segment.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
Well, again, like I said last show, I'm going to talk about something we covered this week. So all things being equal, I think President Biden's debate performance was nothing short of a catastrophe. This is something that could not be forgotten by anyone who watched, and will probably end up sinking the president's chances to win over independents and any new supporters. But that said, the election will still ultimately be won by the candidate whose base is inspired to participate. And Democratic-leaning voters do have significant inspiration to show up beyond the president himself, which namely the consequences of what appears to be a transformative shift if President Trump returns to office. So while any casual observer might be inclined to think that replacing Biden would provide the best shot at preventing that outcome, the power brokers of the Democratic National Party do not agree with this conclusion. So my prediction is that the Democratic Party is going to circle the wagons and do everything in their power to avoid replacing him, meaning the plan to promote the Biden-Harris ticket through Election Day and trusting their base to carry them through the finish is the best hope that they've got right now. And I question the wisdom of this choice.
All right, I'm going to take an opposite prediction because I actually believe that there are hints. It's one thing to take a public stand and say you're backing your president. I mean, everybody's doing that, posturing. Newsom did it right after saying he won on the merits or on the substance of the debate. And apparently, if you actually read the debate, doesn't sound so bad. But I think that the wheels are spinning. The donors are pulling out. And Pelosi and Clymer, both by acknowledging that it's a legitimate question to ask as to whether it's a condition rather than just a one-time thing. I think they've pretty much set it up so that they've given permission for other leaders to do that. And I think it's going to come to criticize Biden for staying in the race. I think that's going to cascade, especially with the next senior moment, and it's going to happen. Whether it happens in this interview with Stephanopoulos. I mean, if he wanted to show himself, he should have gone on to Fox News the next day and say, no, I just had a bad day off. You're all a bunch of jerks, and throw on what you got at me. But he can't. He can't do that. 20 years ago, he could have done that. I am predicting that the reason that they chose such an early debate is so that they're going to give him some time and that they are going to really pressure him into dropping out. I believe the replacement they cannot bypass Harris. She's the vice president. That will really blow up the coalition if they bypass her and stick a white man in there, even somebody as good as Newsom, who the Republicans are afraid of. The only way they can possibly bypass it is if Michelle Obama contradicts everything she said so far and is willing to be reluctantly drafted. Arthur C. Clarke once said that nobody who wants to be president should be president. You know, they might try to pull something like that. But I predict that Biden will be pulling out before, or at least early on in the convention. Harris will step up, and then she'll have to pick a VP. And I believe that she will win, despite all of the negatives. She will win handily. Till then, we'll see if any of that comes true. Until
to
next
be determined.
time,
Yeah.
Yep. Stay informed and stay engaged.